morning, everyone. Thank you all for coming out to this event. It's a really great honor for us to be able to speak to you today and share our thoughts and share where we're going with Office of Pharmaceutical Quality and some of the new initiatives that we have here. Just a housekeeping note, I've been told that I have a very soft radio voice, so if at any point during this presentation you can't hear me, the microphone's not picking it up that well, just yell out a code word, interrupt me, I'm fine with that. Let's agree on a word right now. How about Cobra? If you guys can't hear me, just yell out Cobra. And I'll know that means I need to speak up a little bit more. So I'm very honored to talk to you today about application manufacturing assessment. In the kind of order of talks, Dr. Kopsha talked to you a lot about what the office does, the entire Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, and all the initiatives that we're involved in regulating and overseeing the world of pharmaceutical quality. Dr. Yu then talked to you about how we do things from an application standpoint, assessment standpoint, excuse me. So we're kind of climbing down the ladder now. And really focusing on one specific office, the Office of Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Assessment. If you've come to previous talks before, you may know us by our previous name, the Office of Process and Facilities. This is now our new name following some CDER modernization efforts in the past couple of weeks even. And what we're going to talk about today is what does our specific office do in sort of leading the charge on manufacturing assessment when it comes to application products. All right, so by the end of this talk, I hope you understand the goals of OPQ's manufacturing assessment, our general process for conducting the manufacturing assessment, and how certain interactions with industry stakeholders regarding manufacturing issues, how that might play out in the real world. All right, so let's put our office into context here, OPMA. So FDA established OPQ, the overall office, to improve the internal assessment of drug quality and our interactions with industry stakeholders to overall improve drug quality. OPQ, as you've heard earlier today, integrates the assessments of drug applications across multiple quality expertise areas, drug substance, drug product, biopharmaceutics, manufacturing, leading to a more informed and holistic quality assessment. OPMA specifically, we conduct the application assessment in coordination with manufacturing facility evaluation, with facility inspections, to ensure that the overall goal of manufacturing is going to produce quality drugs for the patient. This is a very near and dear topic to my heart as a pharmacist, because I'm out there with patients, and they're taking their medications, and they have questions on whether they work well and they're consistent. They look at different manufacturers, and they want to know that the FDA is making sure that every single drug they get, no matter what their insurance puts them on, is going to work correctly. And I have a very proud moment to say in those moments that, well, this is what I do in the FDA every day, is to make sure that these drugs are going to work consistently and that you can trust them. But as Dr. Kopsha said earlier, it's a shared effort. Right? It takes all of us. It's not on the shoulders of one regulatory agency, but on the shoulders of everyone in this room and everyone online listening. All right. This supports our mission, though, right? In that our goal is to ensure that quality is built into the manufacturing processes and the facilities over the product life cycle. We have to go beyond the application approval. We have to go beyond the final release testing. We have to think about every unit manufactured, every drug released to a patient that is going to have built-in quality so we can rely on it. So if you've gone to a previous SBIA event in the past, you've probably seen this slide, which talks about the discipline breakup and how the team sort of works together to give you a science and risk-based approach, a patient-focused approach. What I want to talk to you about today is some of the evolution in thinking in our office around this lower green bubble here. That's showing up on the screen. I sniped that one over there. Regarding how we think about a holistic integration around microbiological components, facility components, and process components to think about holistic manufacturing. That's the subject of the talk today, is sort of how we've evolved in the last few years to become OPMA today. So a brief overview, right? Manufacturing assessment in our office is assessed in a cross-functional team, an integrated quality assessment team. This includes the investigators from the Office of Regulatory Affairs when an inspection is indicated. The center-level assessment is primarily conducted by OPMA. And that allows us to gain a lot of expertise and a lot of subject matter knowledge about a particular manufacturing process, control strategy, microbiological sterility assurance strategy, and the facilities involved in operating this process, which allows us to bring a lot of subject matter expertise to a pre-approval inspection when indicated, so that the inspection itself is way more focused and relevant to the product being manufactured and the proposals in the application itself. Now, the integration of these activities, right? Looking at the application, building that expertise, going out on site, participating with ORA lead investigators, and closing the loop on the back end. The goal is to seek balance between how we oversee quality through the application activities and through the inspection activities, because both elements represent how drugs are manufactured. Both elements have an impact on the quality of medications that will ultimately be distributed to patients. So we think about some of the evolution, where we were in the Office of Processing Facilities back in 2015 and how we've evolved to our current state, OPMA. So in OPF, we had three very distinct disciplines across process assessments, facility assessments, microbiology assessments. But over the years, our thinking has evolved to allow these component elements to sort of coalesce to a holistic manufacturing assessment. I have a diagram later that will help explain how we got to that point. This is primarily an elevation in our thought process. So instead of looking at individual components, we now aim for a higher target. Instead of looking at just the process and looking at just the facility or just the micro, we ask ourselves, will manufacturing operations, inclusive of all of these elements, give us the right drug day in and day out? We were able to do this over the past couple of years because of expanded assessor capabilities. We've had a lot of interesting experiences over the last few years. I see some of my reviewer or assessor colleagues in the office here, in the audience here, who can tell you some fun stories about what we've learned and what we've gone through. We've also been privileged to have some enhanced assessment and inspection processes. So Dr. You talked about CASA, you talked about the concept of operations, and all these things have informed us in how we can become higher level reviewers, more mature reviewers or assessors when it comes to manufacturing. Revised policies and programs that really capture the ethos of what we're talking about here. So I don't know if you guys have read the draft guidance on continuous manufacturing or the draft guidance on ICH Q12. We've been going way back to 2011's process validation guidance. You can see threads in there about the mixture of submission information, development information, implementation at a manufacturing source, quality system oversight. These concepts are merging together into a holistic manufacturing approach, and it's reflected in our updated and revised policies and programs, as well as a rich collaboration between our assessors and inspectors. So let's go back to some of this evolutionary concepts here, right? When we think about 2015 Office of Process Facilities and the three distinct components of microbiology, facility, and process, ask ourselves, what were each of these groups doing? What was their charge? So if you were a microbiological assessor, you might ask yourself, I'm looking at an application, will the manufacturing controls, the tests, the product design ensure the drug is sterile? If I'm on the facility side, I'm going to ask, does the facility have the required capability and experience to execute a manufacturing process? On the process side, I might ask myself, is the manufacturing process designed and controlled to consistently deliver quality drug? Can it be scaled up? But if you're a keen observer in the audience, you'll see that there's a common meeting point in all of those questions, and that everyone was touching a little bit of manufacturing. So this is what allowed us to sort of take a step back and ask, well, what's the right goal for the patient? Does the patient want to know that the process is perfect, but not have confidence in the facilities or the microbiological control strategies, or any one of those three? No, if I'm a patient or if I'm a practitioner, I want to know that, let me use this mouse as an example, the drug I get works. All components are working together. So allow us to step back and start refocusing our assessors to, again, a more mature assessment, a higher level goal of looking at the holistic manufacturing output. So what we do in the office, we assess the potential for manufacturing to impact product quality attributes. And that direct involvement with the application assessment and the facility evaluation leads us to have better understanding of how manufacturing, not only is it designed, how the intended process is set up, how we expect it to be controlled, but how it's actually being executed by the people doing the job every day, those manufacturing facilities out there. And that familiarity with the intended process design, the development experience that we see in Module 2 and Module 3 of the application helps us drive more effective inspections where we're looking at elements on site that are relevant to what we see in the application so that there's a common thread throughout the entire process. The goal, like I had mentioned before, is to make sure that we can get a better balance between risk identification and risk mitigation. By looking at this end-to-end control strategy across the entire application, across the entirety of the supply chain, we can then put risks into context and make sure that we are asking for the right risk mitigation strategies and balancing them appropriately. So for example, let's take a very simple example of blend uniformity and content uniformity, right? I may be a blend expert, and I may be very concerned that there is blend uniformity testing at the end of every If I only focus on that one specific element, I may be missing the forest for the trees. I may not be looking at what's happening downstream. What are the controls during the compression operation? What are the tests and measurements that I see in the compression operation or even at release? Because maybe those answer my question. Maybe those mitigate risk in such a way that I don't need to perfect things in such a way upstream. That end-to-end control strategy and that holistic understanding, apply that to the entire supply chain, from starting materials, drug substance testing, drug product operations, all the way through release operations and packaging operations. It allows us now to see how do we balance risk the right way to make sure that the product works. It also helps us to see how do we pull on the right levers, the right tools for risk mitigation, because the tools that we need to mitigate risk might be driven by the process, maybe driven by what we see in the application, or might be driven by implementation of the facilities. And some of the case studies you hear should help you get a better appreciation of that later today. I'll talk a little bit of just at a very high level and later on the slide deck, an example that might make that come to life. So overall, right, this sort of end-to-end thinking, this sort of maturation in the assessment program and maturation in the target that we're looking for leads us to a higher confidence that quality is built into the process controls and the facility operations. Said another way, it helps us have confidence that the units manufactured, the ones that are not tested, the ones that are not destroyed for release testing, but the ones that are actually going out to patients are of the appropriate identity, purity, quality, potency, safety, efficacy, you name it. So the elevation in thinking is that now we look at this whole thing as manufacturing. It's all these components coalescing together to give us a manufacturing question and answer. So I try to make things practical so that it connects with people in the audience, and even for me, because I'm a very practical guy. I'm not I don't consider myself a real strong academic, even though I love that stuff. But anyway, I live kind of more in the practical world here. What we have here is a picture of a restaurant and a kitchen. To me, the assessment philosophy is driven by the question you're trying to answer. And the data you pull is driven by the question you're trying to answer. Show of hands, who's gone to a restaurant before? Great, okay, this should all be relevant to you then. Something that I love to do with my wife is we like going out and going to restaurants and trying different cuisines and looking at different techniques and really understanding how food comes together, right? I mean, you could call us foodies, even though it sounds a little snobby. We just like good food. And if you don't like good food, we should talk outside, and so I can understand more about you as a human being. But when I go to a restaurant, right, I like to know that it's going to be a tasty meal. I'm going to enjoy it. It's going to be consistent, right, that every time I go to that restaurant, it's going to be the same quality of meal. It's going to be the same consistency in the way it's prepared. I like to know that the chefs know what they're doing, right, that they're trained, they're using the right techniques. I like to know that the meal is going to be available, right, that even when the kitchen is slammed and there are hundreds of people in the restaurant, the food quality doesn't suffer. I also like to know that I'm not get sick when I eat it, right, that it's free of contamination. It's not have bacteria all in it. Like the inventory is all messed up because they're using lettuce from 10 weeks ago. They're trying to sell me something, right? But if you go to a restaurant, you can really gauge the quality of the food that you're going to get by looking at how the kitchen operates, right? I've heard somewhere that if you see a kitchen working like a symphony orchestra, you're in good hands. If it looks like a rock band at a metal show, maybe get out, right? So the questions that you ask are driven by the goal you're trying to achieve, right? So when I look at this restaurant, I think about my holistic assessment hat here. Here's what I see. I see batch ingredients weighed out, pre-measured in the place they need to go. I see manufacturing process with operators who are trained, who are gowned to make sure that the meal is going to be safe from contamination, but a process flow happening in the right order from the top of your screen to the middle of your screen. I see equipment design and facility design to prevent contamination, wash stations where they need to be, HEPA filters, or in my mind, HEPA filters. That's what I want to see in restaurants. Of course, I know that's not true. But good, adequate air filtration to make sure that the product won't be contaminated. I see equipment that has been used is now segregated and off to the side, so it doesn't be used, it's not used again. I see quality control, someone doing the finishing operation, who's making sure that each and every plate that leaves that restaurant kitchen is going to meet the user expectations. Now, I suppose I could sit here and just be concerned about the recipe, just to make sure that it's a well-designed recipe that, if executed properly, that should be a good tasting meal, and not care about the chefs. not care about the kitchen, not care about the actual execution of operations. But what good would that do me, right? I wouldn't be getting a good meal. I could sit here and be just concerned about the chefs and how they can chop up onions and how good they are at repeating those operations. But if they have no ability to taste anything, if they have no ability to make sure that it's seasoned correctly, all that doesn't serve my goal of making sure that I'm going to get a good tasting meal that's consistent, that is free of contamination, that meets my expectations as an eater. Drug manufacturing to me is no different, right? In that we should be looking at the holistic coalescence of all of this, that not just the recipes, not just the process, not just the facilities or just the design of the kitchen, not just the microcontrol strategies, the contamination prevention, or the inventory management, but the whole thing. Because at the end of the day, I want a good meal. I don't want a good process. I don't want a good facility. I don't want a good microcontrol strategy. I want the whole thing, right? And that's kind of how we think about things in the Office of Pharmaceutical Manufacturing Assessment, is the whole thing working together to get us the right drug product. So kind of an overview of how we do things, right? Just to give you a general flavor, which hopefully sets up the case studies that you hear at the kind of the second half of this session here. We always start with initial risk identification and assessment. We have to start somewhere. And we really try to think about this in three arms: the product risk, the process risk, the facility risk, to understand what are those unique risks about the patient population, the specific context of use that inform what the product's critical quality attributes need to be. The process itself, so understanding the impact of those processing conditions and controls on the assurance of those product CQAs. The facility experience, right? Understanding if the site itself has the demonstrated capability to do what they say they're going to do, or if we have some concerns about whether or not they can meet those expectations. That holistic initial risk assessment and initial risk identification leads us to our first sort of decision point. The strategies that we're going to use to further assess that risk. That might be information requests that we need to send to the applicant for concerns that we're seeing about information submitted to us, or we might ask for an inspection at a certain facility because we're concerned about the demonstrated capability or the history of the site to adopt this new process, this new control strategy, et cetera. Which then leads us into our first sort of risk mitigation and evaluation activities, sending those information requests, conducting those inspections, looking at the responses, looking at the information that comes back to us in the application and seeing whether or not that information adequately mitigates risk, or if we have further concerns that require repeat activities, or in the worst case scenario, potentially complete response action on that application. That final risk assessment, though, we're asking ourselves, after everything that we've seen, after all the questions that we've asked, after all the mitigation activities, do we have confidence as the FDA that when a drug is made at this facility or through this process or with these controls, that it's going to be that tasty meal, that it's going to be the same meal no matter what, no matter how many products are moving through, that the drug is going to be what it's supposed to be every single time, and that patients can count on it. And when they come and ask me questions about, does this drug work? I heard a concern about this source or this country, we can say, yeah, it's going to work. Don't worry about it. So that final risk assessment drives us to the recommendation for approval or complete response, which then sets up our thought process around life cycle considerations. Maybe there are post-approval commitments that we have requested the applicant to execute to ensure that risk is further mitigated in the life cycle. Maybe we've teed up certain product-specific post-approval inspections to challenge process validation life cycle, supplier qualification activities, whatever it may be, or follow-up to certain corrective actions that were proposed during the review cycle itself, or surveillance inspection, where we would partner with our Office of Quality Surveillance. And then we follow up communication with the applicant or the sites themselves to make sure that they understand what our expectations are going into the product life cycle. All right, so taking this back to this idea about multifaceted, holistic assessment here. What I'm hoping to show you in this slide is that the things that we look at live in both the application and the facilities themselves. So if we took the example of blend uniformity, we want to make sure that blend was uniform. We're going to have to challenge a couple different things here. So we might look at the material attributes, like, for example, the particle size distribution, the order of addition, how the process is set up, the process parameters themselves, any process controls and measurement. We also look at the blender design, its qualification, its capability, the operator training, the on-site controls, the batch record instructions, how feasible they are to be repeated and scaled up. And then quality unit responses to deviations. How is the site actually manufacturing and staying in control? Because we know stuff happens, right? We know things don't go as planned all the time. But what we want to know is that there are smart people in charge who know how to react to problems and get ahead of them. And what I hope you can appreciate is that that is a mixture of things that we might see in the application across things we might see in the facility. And the coalescence of all that information helps us get confidence that, in this example, the blend will be uniform. It's the same thing for sterility assurance, right? In the application, we might be pulling on more information like the test methods, the preservative concentration and uniformity, the selection of those preservatives, the compounding unit operations, all the way down to the facility design, the laboratory operations and controls, the actual results that the site is generating and reacting to, and the quality unit decisions as a result. Are they making the right batch release decisions? Are they launching the right investigations? All of that together helps us get confidence that the product will be correct today and tomorrow and the day after. So I want to pivot a little bit because I get this question quite a bit. Following our elevation in thinking, following our merger of assessment and inspection activities, I hear it quite a bit. I got an IR for something and I got a 483 for the same issue. What's going on at the FDA? So let's talk about that for a second. So what I want to convey here is that it's important to note that a single manufacturing issue that we see through our assessment might be communicated best through an information request to an applicant or a 483 to the facility. And that may be driven by, well, what is the resultant behavior that we need, or what's the resultant thing that we need to come out of this? Do we need information in the application to be submitted, or do we need the facility to implement corrective and preventive actions? In some cases, both may be appropriate if the issue is shared between what we're seeing in the application and what's happening at the facilities. You might need to have an information request to update the application and a 483 to the site to implement a corrective action. The reason for this is that it ensures the right owner is taking responsibility to resolve the concern, because we want to make sure that the corrections are relevant and timely in the places that they need to be. It also ensures that the application is accurate, that we're going into the product lifecycle, that the information that we're relying on as an agency is up to date, correct, and that manufacturing will deliver a quality product. So here's an example of that. Actually, I don't know if that's big enough for you guys to see, but this is an excerpt from our recent revised FDA pre-approval inspection compliance program. And this document published on September 16, 2019. You can go online and you can find it. And in the back of that document, there's what we call Attachment A. And Attachment A has maybe a handful of pages that look like this chart here, which talked about the shared assessment and inspection responsibilities to resolving quality issues, and how you might see different threads being pulled on to make sure that issues are resolved in the right places, in the right time, in the right way. In this specific example, I know it might be hard to read, so I'll kind of explain what's going on here. During the IQ18 assessment before an inspection is ordered, there's a concern about the exhibit batches themselves and whether or not they match the proposed commercial process, and whether or not any gaps in the relevancy between those operations cause us to question the data we're looking at in the application. So an inspection happens, the team finds out that the processes and controls used for the exhibit batches are vastly and wildly different from those proposed in the commercial operations and are significant enough to make us question whether or not that exhibit batch data is relevant to product that will be distributed to patients after we approve this application. We also find that there are GMP problems with the way the site is actually conducting its manufacturing operation. So in this case, we have a shared manufacturing issue where the resolution requires two different parties to get involved. We might send a 43 to that facility to resolve their GMP problems with manufacturing that we have observed. And we might send an information request to the applicant to ask them for updated submission data to show us that there are no negative quality impact for that difference between the exhibit batch manufacturing and the proposed commercial manufacturing. So hopefully that gives you an appreciation of why you might see an information request and a 483 for a shared issue. But all that allows us to sum up and ask ourselves, was the drug made correctly? When we look at an application, we want to know that the information we're looking at is relevant to the proposed commercial product, what the patient's going to get. So we're looking at the exhibit batches, the executive manufacturing process, et cetera, because we want to know that what was done in the past is a good predictor of what could happen in the future, as well as will the drug be made correctly? Because our goal, again, is life cycle, right? We want to make sure that after action on that application, what the patient gets is what was described in the application, what was executed on site during those pre-approval inspections, et cetera. And that is all a result of this holistic manufacturing assessment between the application and the facility evaluation. So in conclusion, our elevated thinking now and our maturation in our program to think about manufacturing as a whole, in my opinion, aligns better with the real world of manufacturing. Manufacturers today simultaneously and holistically implement processes, controls, sterility assurance practices, GMPs, all at the same time when they're making products. And for us, the manufacturing assessment considers multiple quality elements that must work in balance. And this balanced assessment is what provides confidence that drug will be consistently produced to meet patient requirements and quality requirements over its life cycle. So with that, I'm done with my formal talk. Let's go into the knowledge check here. So manufacturing assessment is which? A, B, or C? Is it focused on the information submitted in the application? Is it limited to the manufacturing facilities and inspections? Or is the integration of the assessment of submission information and facilities? Fantastic, 100%. All right. Next one. An information request and a 483 item about the same manufacturing issue indicates what? One, the FDA is confused. Or two, the resolution requires information to be submitted to the application and corrections to the GMP operations of the site. Whew. Good job, guys. All right. Well, that's it for me. I'm going to head off stage and hand it back to Ray. Thank you.